I apologize for my really, really dry throat today. Excel services, that's another important SharePoint widget. I'm not going to talk about it in a lot of detail. And this is a fairly busy-looking slide. But if you take the technology out of it and look at it purely in a nutshell, Excel services are built into MOS, and you can expose essentially Excel spreadsheets without needing a client-side Excel program. Meaning, I can log into my SharePoint site, and if I go to a particular place, I can actually see a spreadsheet without ever having to instantiate Excel on my own. Now, what are the advantages here? Excuse me. You can lock cells, meaning only show show all of the information in the spreadsheet, but really allow editing of a few cells. So you run the script, it automatically renders you an algorithm, uses the algorithm and renders you a result. There are a lot of ways that this can be used. For example, if you have a lab and you have a spreadsheet that performs certain calculations based on some data input that you get from an HPLC or something, right? We all struggle through spreadsheet validation efforts and all of that. So you really want the end user to be locked into a few fields where they enter the data and then automatically get the result. Right? You really don't want them to mess around with the underlying logic, because that really compromises the results, right? So you can set up with Excel services where you can set up this whole spreadsheet and validate that spreadsheet as part of your overall effort, and then expose just what you want the users to see, and then you're covered. In view of time, I'm going to kind of move forward a little bit. So now that we talked a little bit about these various widgets, how can we apply this? How can you apply this to a real-life case study? I'm going to look at training management as an example. I'm going to use a very, very simple training management system. What do we really, really need in a training management system? We need a bunch of users, their titles, their names, and all of that, right? We need a place where we can keep the training materials, SOPs, for example. And they have to be version controlled. Someone's routing it, approving it, and once it's approved, users who are affected need to be trained, right? They need to be training profiles, meaning, QA Specialist 1. QA Specialist 1 needs to be trained on 7 SOPs and 8 other documents. QA Specialist 2 needs all of that plus 5 more. So we need a place where we manage that. We need a place for managing training records, meaning I trained on this particular document. When was I trained? Was it instructed training or read training or whatnot, right? And then perhaps a task list saying, hey, you have training due, or hey, you have a document you need to approve, or there's a document that's expiring soon, you need to edit it, or a place where delinquencies are reported. Hey, Subbu was supposed to train on this two SOPs yesterday, and he's delinquent, so you better do something about it. And perhaps an audit trail, a place where you keep track of all of these various changes to the profiles or these records, right? So that's in a nutshell the overall business process flow, right, for training. So how would we actually implement this in SharePoint? So we'll have a user list, right, where every time a new user is added, perhaps a task is triggered to I'm going to call this person the training manager, saying, hey, there's a new user in the company. This user needs to be assigned to a training profile, right? Meaning he needs to be assigned to a profile, say he's a QA Specialist 1, and once he's assigned to a profile, he needs to be trained on all of the SOPs associated with the profile, right? So you might edit the user, right? So you edit that item in that list. Perhaps the title is changed, for example. And if the title is changed, perhaps the profile needs to be changed as well. So you send out a task to the training manager saying, hey, this person's title has changed, double check his profile. Or you retire the user. If you retire the user, he should no longer be part of the system, right? And he should be out of all the training profiles and so on. And some sample metadata that it could have, a user full name, department, et cetera, et cetera. Perhaps this can even be populated, auto-populated from an HR database that's external to SharePoint. So that's one way of automating it. So the next thing that you might need is a training document library, right, where SOPs and training manuals and all of that information is stored. Obviously, version control, auto-numbering can be a feature, right? And when you add a new document, and you actually approve that document through a workflow. When you approve it and the workflow is triggered, tasks are assigned to various approvers and reviewers to perform certain activities. And if they reject it, tasks need to be assigned to the author saying, hey, this was rejected, do such and such. But if it is approved, then a task needs to be assigned to perhaps a training manager or the QA manager saying, this is a brand new document or a new version. Does it need to be does it need to belong to a new profile or an existing profile, right? So that's a task. And once this document is linked to that training profile, we want to send out tasks to all the users who belong to that profile saying, hey, here's SOP XYZ, you need to be trained on it, right? And what else do we need to do with this document library? Perhaps the documents expire periodically. And, so before they expire, perhaps you send out a task to the author saying, hey, this document is due for expiry a week from now, you better edit it. So that's another way of, and that's another feature or another workflow that can be triggered. And you can look at the various metadata that's associated with this particular library. Again, this is just a very, very simple example. What else do we need? We need a training profiles list where, we store a list of SOPs associated with this profile. And if you remember earlier in this users list, each user is associated with one or many profiles, right? So that's how we track all of this information. So training profiles, when you have a new training profile, you have to have some documents associated with it. So that's an activity that can be triggered. And when anything changes, tasks are assigned, meaning the new documents are added to it. Say new documents are added to this training profile, you automatically have to send out notifications to every user saying, thou shalt get trained on this, and so on. Then, of course, you have a training records, which contains who got trained, when, where, in what kind of way. Was it, read or instructed or failed, and so on and so forth. So this is extremely critical to have per user, per document, version specific, and it's a permanent record that nobody can change. Of course, we talked about tasks being triggered on and off right throughout the process, and that's managed in a task list. And finally, okay, so this is how this overall system works. But it's also very important for us to have a role-specific dashboard, meaning a training profile manager should have fairly high administrative kind of rights for this overall application, right? He should be notified of training delinquencies and new users and new documents and so on. But the QA manager or QA doc control manager perhaps just manages the document management portion of it. And a regular user just needs their task lists and their list of SOPs that they need to be, that's part of their profile. And that's about it. So you can create role-specific dashboards that people have access to. Excuse me. Other requirements include security and delinquency checks, like I talked about, and audit trails. Audit trails with SharePoint has a fairly thorough audit trail, which you can turn on as well. But some of it is pretty cryptic and it's hard to get to. So you can actually program your own audit trail as well on using those event triggers, and you can populate that as part of an audit trail list, perhaps.